Michael Sibi here with another Conversation for a Cause. I'm sitting down with Roy Ventullo, a biology professor here at Wartburg College. He takes a trip to the rainforest with a bunch of students every year. And malaria is one of the things you guys kind of consider when you're taking this trip, is it?
Yeah, it's one of the few, we get vaccines for other things, but for malaria we take some prophylactic meds before we go. And then during the whole time we're there, and then for a couple of weeks after we get back.
Malaria is not a big problem here in the United States. How does malaria work? It comes from a mosquito bite, but what happens kind of within the bacteria, virus, or protozoa?
Yeah, it's a protozoal disease, and it is mosquito-driven. It used to be here in the United States back in the 1800s, back when we had a lot more wetlands around, and it has been sort of driven out with DDT and the sprays and things we did in the 60s and 70s. It is a mosquito-borne, and there are two types. There are morning-feeding mosquitoes and the ones that feed in the evening, and the evening feeders tend to be the ones that carry the mosquitoes. The downside in the tropics is this is the time when a lot of men go out and go fishing right around sunset, which is when these mosquitoes are out. Bed nets work really the best. But again, most of these places, especially the smaller villages, do not use bed nets. People are sleeping in an open hut with no screens and no windows, and therefore it's quite prevalent in some of these areas. Africa, much worse than South America, but South America still has its share of malaria. The protozoa itself, once it gets into the mosquito, it lives in its gut and then gets into the salivary gland. And then, of course, when it bites you, that saliva gets into your skin, gets into your bloodstream, and then starts to replicate in your red blood cells. And so that's where a lot of the 48 to 72-hour fever cycle comes through in malaria. It's because your red blood cells are lysing at that point, and you get chills and fever. The worst cases go from that phase to a cerebral malaria, where it actually gets into your nervous system and then actually winds up in death. So there are several strains of malaria bugs, the protozoa, and one of them, the one that's not quite as bad, can be relapsing. That is, even if you survive it, later on in life when you come down with some sort of immunocompromised disease and you're stressed later on, you can actually get malaria again without ever even getting bit by a mosquito. So there are a couple of different strains of that protozoa out there.
Yeah. Have you had unfortunate circumstances where you've come down with malaria on trips, or have you gotten pretty lucky on all the trips down there that you have escaped malaria?
Yeah, nobody on the trips to Guyana in South America have come down with malaria. We have had some students in Africa, I think Tanzania, where they did the month-long studies back 10, 15 years ago, where they came back, and even though they were taking the prophylactic medicines, which are supposed to stop you from getting the malaria, they actually came back and wound up getting malaria. So we've had one or two students in the past 18 years that's happened to.
So seeing people with malaria, has it kind of made you want to take action, especially with the malaria initiative this year, take action to help these people?
Yeah, we have actually, we had a project, part of the Davis Foundation funded a project several years ago with two of our students here, a biology major and poli-sci major, and it was $10,000 in funding. We flew down there, and I have a friend, Roop, in Georgetown, and he purchased the mosquito netting. We purchased sewing machines. We purchased thread and the ropings that's needed, and we brought those in and delivered the sewing machines and bed nets, the actual net material, to the people in the villages. And then the women's sewing groups, which are a large part of the social context within those villages, made mosquito nets very cheaply because we supplied them. And then, of course, later they could use the money then to buy more mosquito and make more. So we gave them the kinds of materials that they needed to do that. And so we actually drove around to the different villages and dropped that material off. We wish we could do more. It seemed like the South Rupununi, which is where we go in Guyana, has many more villages that could certainly use that thing. But the mosquito nets they make in those villages are far superior to anything that you can buy in Georgetown. They're much longer. They're made for hammocks because most people sleep in hammocks in the interior, not beds.
I imagine our documentaries focus on children. How badly does it affect children?
It tends to debilitate them. You have to realize that these people also have some other issues as well. There are other medical things, other kinds of intestinal parasites and some other things going on with them besides the malaria. And so that's just one more disease that they may get. especially if they're undergoing malnutrition, which you see all over the place in third world countries. If you're malnutrition and you get malaria, you're really going to have a hard time. So it's pretty rough on kids. The thing is, you can get it multiple times, unlike some other diseases where if you get a particular disease and you're immune to it, that does not happen with malaria. You can get malaria over and over and over again. And the other thing that can happen with kids sometimes is they get 2 malaria strains at the same time. They get bit by 2 mosquitoes. They carry different malaria strains, and they get 2 kinds of malaria at the same time, which is just devastating because your immune system just can't fight it off.
This has been another Conversation for a Cause. I'd like to give my thanks to Roy Ventullo for joining me today. And to get more involved with the Wartburg Malaria Initiative, go to wartburg.edu/malaria or go to 60secondstochange.com.